Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. Is 2022 the year you might start thinking about hanging up your hat and passing on the business to the next generation? Before you do, though, have you thought whether the current business structure is the right fit for the next in line? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. It might be worth considering a restructure, says Beissel, tax partner at Mazars. After all, the structure for the family business, when it was first established, often many years ago, might not be the right one for the future. Beissel explains to Chris Ashmore.
For example, the business may have been operating in a family trust, which was suitable when the profits were modest and represented the sort of mum and dad business owner's income. But the business today might be much larger, and the next generation might be looking, say, to invest a significant portion of the profits in future growth rather than drawing all the profits as their own income.
What factors determine the right structure for a business?
Well, every business structure has compromises, be that tax, commercial, legal, and it's therefore really important to understand the business's objectives to make the right structuring decisions based on the specific priorities of the business. So this involves looking into the future, and while no one can have a crystal ball, when I work with clients on restructuring their businesses, I'm seeking to understand their expectations and goals for the business and to get the best possible picture of the future. And in looking at this, there's a number of factors that I'm looking for, and some of the key ones I'll just go through briefly. So firstly, growth. What is the expected growth in revenue and profits? Business strategy. Are there planned changes to the business, for example, a new division? Capital. What capital will be required and where will it come from? For example, will new external borrowings be required, or will a substantial portion of profits be reinvested in the business? Ownership. Is there any intention to bring in other part owners in the future, be that for further capital injection or to sell down part of the family's ownership, or say to facilitate equity for key employees? And the last one I'll mention is an exit plan. Is there a plan to sell or otherwise exit the business in, say, the next 5 to 10 years? And if so, what might this look like? So all of these factors are important in understanding what the right structure for a business is.
And what about tax? Is tax a barrier to restructuring a family business?
Yeah, certainly. So in the absence of tax concessions, a business restructure that involves moving assets from one entity to another is usually treated as though the business has been sold for its market value to a third party. So say you want to move your business from a family trust to a company, that transfer would ordinarily be treated as a sale from the trust to the company at market value. And so this would mean paying tax on any gains inherent in the value of the business, likely mostly as a capital gain on goodwill as a result of that transaction, even though it's not a liquid transaction with real cash involved. And so, as you can appreciate, that's a real impediment to undertaking this kind of restructure. Unlike a sale to a third party, there's no cash on the table that can cover the tax. And usually that kind of tax liability would be enough to make a restructure unfeasible for a family business.
Well then, how can tax be mitigated?
Well, there are several tax concessions that are available that can mitigate or reduce tax to an acceptable level to make restructuring a family business possible without undue tax. One type of concession that's specifically intended to help businesses restructure without triggering a tax liability are the CGT rollovers. And these are concessions that allow an unrealised capital gain to be rolled into a new structure, allowing the deferral of the capital gain until, say, a future sale. And each CGT rollover provision is designed around a particular type of transaction. So, for example, a transfer of business assets from a trust to a wholly owned company, or a transfer of business assets from a partnership to a company that's then owned by the partners. Or another one would be an exchange of shares in one company for shares in another company. And each of these rollover provisions has its own specific requirements that needs to be met. And these need to be stepped through very carefully to ensure that transaction is carried out in a way that qualifies for CGT rollover relief. Another area of tax concessions that can be useful in business restructures are the small business CGT concessions. And whilst these aren't designed specifically to be targeted at business restructures, they can equally be applied to restructure transactions as they can to a sale to a third party, provided that the eligibility conditions are satisfied. And just to talk about those briefly, so broadly, to access the small business CGT concessions, that's dependent on either having a business with less than $2 million of annual turnover or net family assets, so including business and investment assets owned by related entities, but excluding the family home and superannuation, adding up to less than $6 million. So those are the two pathways, the 2 million turnover or less than 6 million of net assets. And then within those concessions, there's 4 specific concessions, being the 15-year exemption, the active asset 50% reduction, the retirement exemption, and the small business rollover. And each of these then has additional requirements that must be met. For example, the 15-year concession requires the relevant asset, so in the case of a business restructure, that might be business goodwill, has been held for more than 15 years, and the transaction is in the connection with the retirement of a significant individual, which is someone who's got at least a 20% ownership interest in the business entity. And as with the rollovers, these are requirements that need to be really carefully considered to ensure that you're applying the right concessions and to ensure that you're not inadvertently triggering tax by misstepping on one of those eligibility requirements. And then another concession that can assist with some businesses to restructure tax effectively is the pre-CGT exemption for assets that have been acquired prior to the 20th of September 1985, which allows a full CGT exemption for these assets. So we've got a business that's been operated continuously since 1985 or earlier. The goodwill of the business itself may be a pre-CGT asset. Now, to apply this exemption, you need to be able to demonstrate that the identity of the business has been retained continuously since before the 20th of September 1985, so that you can demonstrate that the goodwill you have today is that same asset. And this requires a careful analysis of the way the business has been operated over time, looking at a number of factors including customers, suppliers, the types of goods and services offered, business names, etc. So whilst it's not necessary to show that there hasn't been any change in the business, changes to the business over time should be gradual and organic. So there's been no point where the identity of the old business ceased and a new business commenced. So you need to be able to show that continuity of identity. The appropriate tax concession to apply is going to be different for each business, and it always is going to depend on the particular facts and the objectives in each case. And so it's really important then to get the right advice that looks at your goals and the plans of your business to find the right structure and the right tax-efficient pathway to get there.
Well, finally, in summary, Evan, what are the key points for listeners?
Firstly, business restructures can be really valuable in facilitating succession and future business growth in family businesses. Secondly, it's important to understand the business plan and objectives in order to find that right structure for a particular business. Thirdly, tax is a major factor. Get it wrong, you will have a big tax bill, and it can be a barrier to getting the right structure or, in fact, into restructuring it all in the first place. And then finally, using the right tax concessions can allow that tax to be mitigated, including CGT rollover concessions, small business concessions, the pre-CGT exemption, and there are some others as well that I haven't talked about today. But there are some really good strategies there that can get great outcomes for businesses.
That was Mazars tax partner, Evan Beissel. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.